July 3rd, 1944. 2:11 hours. Lechfeld Airfield, Bavaria. The darkness trembled before the engines did. A low mist clung to the concrete like a living thing. Curling around the wheels, the fuel lines, the boots of mechanics who moved with hurried, whispered discipline. Above them, the floodlights loomed, chalk-white halos cutting thin columns into the night sky, each one flickering under the weight of an unfamiliar vibration. It didn't sound like any piston engine they had ever serviced. Not a Daimler-Benz, not a Junkers inline, not even the twin throaty growl of a Messerschmitt Bf 10 warming on the far apron. This sound was alien, a rising metallic whine, like pressure building inside a seal world. Major Walter Nowotny stepped out of the operations hut just as the wind shifted, carrying that strange mechanical shriek directly into his chest. He paused, helmet tucked under his arm, oxygen mask dangling from its straps, and watched as the silhouette of his aircraft emerged from the fog. The Messerschmitt Me 262, the world's first operational jet fighter. To the ground crew, it looked like something pulled forward in time. Sleek, sharp, predatory. Twin Junkers Jumo 004 turbojets hung beneath the swept wings like iron lungs. The canopies shimmered in the lamplight. The nose gun ports, home to 430 million Malawian Quach's 108 cannons, were dark, patient waiting. Nowotny exhaled slowly. Every sortie in this machine felt like trespassing into forbidden territory. He crossed the tarmac with long, deliberate strides, boots thudding against the damp concrete. A young mechanic snapped to attention, his face smeared with oil, eyes wide with mixture of awe and fear. Major. The port engine reached idle at 0205. Temperatures stable. She's ready. Nowotny didn't nod. Instead, he stepped closer to the humming engine, watching pale flames flicker inside the exhaust cone, ghosts of blue and white that pulse like the heartbeat of a creature learning to breathe. In the distance, the rumble of American bombers throbbed faintly through the clouds, a deep, rolling thunder he'd come to recognize instantly. B-24s. Dozens of them, maybe more. But tonight, the Luftwaffe wasn't scrambling tired Bf-109s or battered FW-190s to climb desperately after them. Tonight, they would answer piston engines with something the Allies didn't believe existed yet. A sound sliced through the fog, sharp, electronic, unnatural. The Jumo 004 spun up toward maximum thrust. The entire airfield seemed to hold its breath. A flight officer rushed toward him, breath steaming in the cold night air. Her major, confirmation from command. The bomber stream crossed the Rhine 20 minutes ago. Altitude 6,000 meters. Escorts heavy. Nowotny's jaw tightened. Escorts heavy. Mustangs. Fast. Deadly. Ruthless. But tonight, they would be hunting a ghost. A machine almost twice as fast as anything they escorted. He climbed the ladder, stepping into the cockpit. The metal was cold beneath his gloves. Instruments glowed faintly, soft blues, greens, and amber points of light that cast ghostly reflections on the canopy. He lowered himself into the seat, a perfect fit, as though the aircraft were shaping itself around him. The canopy swung down, sealing with a muted click. Silence closed in, thick and pressurized, broken only by the scream of the engines and the metallic rattle of the airframe preparing for the violence of acceleration. Through the glass, the ground crew backed away slowly, not because of regulations, though those existed, but because there was something unnatural about the machine at full idle. The pressure, the vibration, the sense that at any second the airframe might tear open the night and vanish into some other realm. Nowotny pressed the throat mic. Lechfeld Tower, this is Nowotny. Engine temp stable. Requesting clearance. Static crackle for a moment, swallowed by the jet's rising scream. Cleared for takeoff. Major. Godspeed. He eased the throttle forward. The world shifted. First a tremor, then a jolt, then a force that pressed him back into his seat as the aircraft surged forward, not with the rhythmic pulse of pistons, but with smooth, relentless thrust that felt almost sentient. The runway lights streaked into golden lines. The canopy shuddered. The nose lifted. Then, cleanly, effortlessly, The Me-262 detached from the earth, angling upward into the black Bavarian sky. Below, the fog swallowed the runway whole. Above, the stars trembled as the jet sliced through the night, leaving a faint comet-like halo in its wake. At 2,000 meters, Nautni pushed the throttle further. The engine screamed. The airframe vibrated with raw, experimental power. 480 miles per hour, then 510, then climbing, 540 miles per hour. The world blurred into a streaked tapestry of silver moonlight and cloud shadow. Every piston-driven aircraft he had ever flown felt like a relic now, a museum exhibit trapped behind glass. Up here, in this machine, he was outrunning history. But the sky ahead was changing. Far on the horizon, faint flashes punctured the darkness, tiny rhythmic bursts of white. Flak, tracer fire, the opening movements of a deadly symphony. Below those flickers moved something larger, darker, and more terrible, the black silhouette of the bomber stream. Hundreds of thousands of horsepower marching eastward like metallic giants. Nautni steadied his breath. This was no training flight, no test sortie. Tonight, history wasn't simply being observed. Tonight, it was being written at 540 miles per hour. He rolled the aircraft slightly, bringing the moonlit clouds across his canopy. The bomber formation grew larger, their engines a dull, distant roar. And then, something flickered in the corner of his vision. Movement, fast, predatory. 3 dark shapes descending from above. Mustangs, P-51s. Their silver bodies shimmering as they angled toward him, diving with cold precision. But they weren't closing the distance. They were falling behind. The Me-262 cut through the sky with impossible speed. The Americans were chasing a phantom. Nautni allowed himself the smallest hint of a smile. But the moment shattered as a burst of tracer fire ripped past his left wingtip. Bright red streaks tearing across the night like burning needles. Not Mustangs. Not yet. Something else had seen him first. He banked hard, engines howling, the G-forces clawing his ribs as he swung the jet into a wide arc. The horizon tilted. The stars seemed to rotate around him. And there, emerging out of the belly of the darkness, came the unmistakable shape of a Liberator gun turret, swiveling, seeking a target. 1 bomber, then 3, then 10. Their guns opened up, stabbing the sky with waves of fire. Nautni steadied his grip. The future had taken flight, but the past was ready to kill it. The first tracers came so close that Nautni felt their heat through the canopy. Scarlet lines carved across the night sky, stitching violent arcs around the Me-262 as the gunners inside the American bombers reacted with instinctive ferocity. They had seen strange aircraft before, oddball prototypes, fast scouts, even the British Mosquito slicing through cloud cover, but none of them moved like this. None of them tore open the darkness with raw, predatory velocity. Nautni pushed the stick forward, dropping the jet into a shallow dive. A roar filled his helmet. Wind. Engine surge. The mechanical snarl of the Jumo 004S biting into cold air. The bomber stream widened in his canopy. An immense, disciplined formation of consolidated B. 24 Liberators, their high-mounted wings glinting like razor edges. When they flew together in daylight, they resembled a moving city, rows upon rows of metal colossi marching across the sky. But at night, they were something else. They were a fortress that breathed fire. He approached the trailing element first. A cluster of 3 Liberators flying in tight echelon, their dorsal and tail turrets already pivoting to track the impossible silhouette streaking toward them. Inside, the lead bomber, called Sign Maple Queen, the tail gunner, Staff Sergeant Robert Malloy, was the first to understand what he was seeing. He shouted over the intercom, voice cracking with disbelief. "Skipper, that ain't a 190. That's no fighter I know. He's too damn fast." The pilot didn't answer. He didn't need to. The crew could feel the tremor of their airframe as the unknown aircraft closed distance like a falling star. Malloy squeezed the butterfly triggers. Twin .50 caliber Brownings thundered to life, vomiting tracers into the night. Brass casings spilled into the slipstream like coins pouring from a broken vault. The guns roared, recoiled, steadied, roared again. Now he saw the first wave arc toward him and rolled hard to the right, the wing slicing through a patch of cloud so thin it dissolved instantly around the fuselage. The tracers tore past his canopy in a luminous storm. One wrong move, one fraction of a second, and he'd be vaporized at 540 miles per hour. He leveled out, eyes narrowed, breath slow and controlled. The Me-262 wasn't built for turning fights, not like the nimble Bf-109, but for attack runs, straight, fast, merciless. It was a scalpel. He aligned with the trailing bomber, held steady. Steady. The 430 million Malawian Quachas, 108 cannons waited. The bomber's dorsal turret opened up next. Twin barrels spat fire upward, the tracers climbing toward him in sharp diagonal bursts. Now he tightened his jaw and dipped lower, flying just beneath the bomber's belly, so close he could almost count the rivets on the oil-streaked fuselage. A burly Liberator crewman looked down through an open hatch and froze. All he saw was a streak of steel and flame as the jet ripped past him. Now he squeezed the trigger. The Me-262 shuddered with controlled violence as the Mk-108s barked. Each cannon round was a miniature grenade, slow firing but devastating. In the brief muzzle flashes, the bomber's silhouette illuminated in strobing detail. 3 rounds struck the Liberator's starboard wing. 1 penetrated the fuel tank. The explosion blossomed outward in a molten burst. Flames engulfed the wing as the bomber rolled violently to the right. Crewmen scrambled inside, shouting over each other, the intercom erupting with panic. Malloy in the tail turret watched the fire bloom along the wing route and felt the sickening plunge begin. "Skipper, we're hit bad. She's going over." The aircraft spiraled downward, leaving a flaming trail across the night sky. Parachutes opened, 1, then 2, then 3, tiny white flowers blooming in the dark. Now he didn't watch it fall. There was no time. The remaining bombers were already shifting formation, tightening ranks, attempting to shield their wounded. He turned the jet in a wide circle, the wings slicing through streaks of flak and machine gun fire. The Me-262 bucked slightly. Those same experimental engines that gave him speed also demanded finesse. 1 rapid throttle change, 1 overeager climb, and the turbines could flame out. A burst of radio static filled his helmet. "Commando Nowotny, this is Lechfeld Control. Enemy escorts entering your sector. Repeat, Mustangs inbound from the west." He cursed under his breath. The P-51s. Fast, agile, ravenous. Their pilots had earned reputations as hunters, skilled, fearless, and absolutely determined to sweep the sky clean of anything flying a Balkenkreuz. But even Mustangs couldn't match the jet. Not in straight-line speed. Not tonight. He banked hard, rising above the bomber stream, letting the flames of the falling Liberator illuminate the underbellies of its companions. From this altitude, the formation looked like a colossal serpent of steel, its scales glinting with each burst of flak, its spine stretching across miles of night sky. Below him, another turret found range. Bright arcs of tracer fire clawed upward, searching, hunting. He rolled left. Not enough. Tracer rounds streaked past his cockpit, so close they left glowing after images across his vision. He drove the jet into a shallow climb, feeling the engine strain. The Jumo 004S whined in protest, a sound every test pilot had learned to fear. If the turbines overheated, even slightly, they could shatter. He eased the throttle back a fraction. Just enough. The jet steadied. The bomber stream loomed larger beneath him again. He picked a new target, center right, flying slightly out of alignment. A, B. 24 with nose art depicting a reclining pin-up girl in the name Lucky Linda, painted in looping white letters. He dove. The Me-262 plunged like a hawk descending on prey, gravity adding its own ruthless momentum. Wind howled past the canopy. The bomber's turret swung upward too slowly. For a moment, the crew inside Lucky Linda saw only a glint, moonlight catching the jet's wing root. Then Nowotny opened fire. 1 shell struck the nose turret, blowing it apart in a fireball that lit the bomber's cockpit in hellish orange. Another round punched through the fuselage, shredding electrical lines. Smoke erupted from the forward compartments as the aircraft veered sharply. Inside, the bombardier screamed as sparks rained over him. The pilot fought the controls, sweating, cursing, pulling with every ounce of strength to keep the bomber steady. Now he shot past, smoke trails curling behind him. He climbed again, but the moment he leveled out, a new shape entered the periphery of his canopy. A silver flash. Small, fast, predator fast. AP-51 Mustang slid into view behind him, nose glinting with the telltale red paint of the 4th Fighter Group. The hunter had arrived. Now Whitney's breath stilled. He shoved the throttle forward. Carefully, precisely, feeling the engines vibrate with strain as the jet surged ahead. The Mustang tilted into pursuit, its pilot reacting instantly, angling into a shallow dive to maintain position. For a heartbeat, the sky tightened around them. Two machines, two eras, one chasing the future, one fleeing the past. The Mustang fired first, a thin, deadly stream of .50 caliber tracers tearing to the night behind the jet. The rounds missed by meters, then by inches again. Now it banked, but the jet didn't turn like a fighter. It swept. It slid through the arc. The Mustang held on. The war's best piston fighter was chasing the world's first jet fighter, and neither pilot was willing to yield. Now it checked his instruments. Fuel dropping. Engine temps rising. Distance to bomber stream. Closing again dangerously. He had two choices. Break away and try to outrun the Mustang, or dive back into the furnace of the bomber formation, into a storm of gunfire, and shake the American loose through chaos alone. He chose the fire. He tipped the Me-262's nose downward, straight toward the glowing defensive screen of the bomber stream. Behind him, the Mustang pilot hesitated, only for a heartbeat, before diving after him with a shout. The sky erupted into chaos. Flak, tracer fire, burning aircraft, the roar of engines pushed beyond safety. And ahead, streaking through the maelstrom, the impossible machine sliced toward the heart of the American formation like a blade descending. The future was about to collide with the furnace of war. The Me-262 plunged toward the bomber stream like a meteor. Wind hammered the canopy in a rising scream, the airframe trembling as Now-Whitney pushed the dive beyond anything he would have attempted in a piston fighter. The altimeter spun downward. The engines roared with frantic, uneven pitch, part fury, part warning. Behind him, the Mustang followed. Close. Too close. Its silhouette flickered in the moonlight, wings flexing as the pilot fought to stay in the jet's wake. Every few seconds, the Mustang's nose dipped or wobbled. Tiny corrections as the pilot battled compressibility forces building around a fast-ascending fighter. But he didn't break off. Now he respected that. Courage, reckless, stubborn courage, was something he understood. The bomber stream swelled in his canopy. Rows of B, 24 Liberators, their formation shimmering behind flak bursts and gun flashes. The thunder of their engines grew into a single, monstrous heartbeat. He was dropping directly into the killing zone. "Come on," he muttered under his breath, steadying his grip on the control stick. "Follow me in, then let's see if you can survive it." The first lines of .50 caliber tracer fire reached upward, streaking past the canopy in glowing red arcs. The bomber's top, waist, and tail gunners were awake, alive and furious. To them, the jet looked like a silver comet descending from the heavens. To them, the Mustang behind it looked no different from another German fighter diving for a kill. So they opened fire on both. Now he tilted the jet slightly, just enough to let instinct take over, reading the tracer patterns, anticipating when the fire converged, seeing the invisible geometry of death drawn in red lines across the sky. He threaded the gap. The Mustang did not. A burst from a dorsal turret lanced directly across the Mustang's nose. The American pilot saw it a second too late. The tracer stitched across his left wing, shredding aluminum and cutting through the painted red trim. Smoke erupted. The Mustang shuddered violently, wings dipping unevenly. The pilot pulled up, fighting to regain control. Now he didn't look back. He was already too deep into the formation. The Me-262 sliced between two bombers at nearly 480 miles per hour. The proximity alarm blared. The turbulence buffeted the jet so hard the canopy rattled. Below him, gunners cursing pivoted their turrets, trying to track the impossible blur of speed. Inside one of the B-24s, a waist gunner, Private Eddie Malone of Detroit, saw something he couldn't comprehend. "Skipper, he just flew under us. Under us. No one's that crazy." But someone was. Now he leveled out just beneath the bomber's belly, rising slowly until the Liberator's massive fuselage loomed above him like the hull of an airborne ship. Oil dripped from the bomb bay doors. Exhaust fumes trailed behind the engines. The wings shook in mild turbulence. He was so close the bomber's shadow darkened the cockpit, and the gunners were blind to him. He squeezed the trigger. The Mk-108s detonated with a thundering roar, for cannon blasts lighting the underbelly of the B-24 like lightning. Shells tore through the thin aluminum floor, ripping open fuel lines, shredding the hydraulic system, exploding inside the rear compartment. Inside, the shock wave threw two gunners off their feet. Fire erupted, sweeping along the floor. Oxygen tanks burst in violent jets, turning the compartment into a firestorm. The bomber lurched, nose dipping as smoke billowed from shattered panels. Yet even in its agony, it fought to survive. The pilot, drenched in sweat, shouted over the intercom, "Hold her! Hold her! Damn it! Hold her!" But the Liberator rolled, burning, falling out of formation. Now Whitney pulled away as the bomber spiraled downward, leaving a trail of flame across the night. For a moment, he could see silhouettes moving inside the doomed aircraft, scrambling for parachutes, fighting to reach the escape hatches. War had never felt more like a collision between fate and physics. But there was no time to watch, no time to breathe. Another burst of flak erupted nearby, rocking the Me-262 with brutal force. Shrapnel pinged off the fuselage. Warning lights flickered amber on the instrument panel. Engine temperature rising, fuel decreasing, and something else. A new shape appeared above the formation. At first it looked like just another dark blot in the sky. Then it tilted, catching a sliver of moonlight. A second Mustang. Then another. Then another. A flight of 4 P-51s descending in perfect formation. Their noses gleamed with squadron colors. Their wings leveled sharply, the smooth, confident movement of pilots who had trained for this exact moment. A jet in the open. Now he felt his heartbeat slow. He knew what was coming. The wild South tactics the Americans adopted for night operations. The long-range escort discipline of the 352nd Fighter Group. The relentless doctrine of pursuit. And above all, their ability to work together. The Mustangs spread out in a loose diamond formation. Their descent was deliberate, coordinated, patient, not reckless like the first pilot, not impulsive. This was a hunt, and they were treating him not as a curiosity, but as prey. Now Whitney steadied his breathing. He checked his altitude. He checked the bomber positions. And he made a decision. He couldn't outrun the Mustangs in a turning fight. He couldn't land. They'd be waiting. He couldn't climb. The engines weren't built for it under combat stress. He couldn't rely on his formation. There was no formation. Tonight, he was alone in the sky, except for the machine beneath him. He angled downward, running parallel to the bombers, tried to use their bulk as partial cover. The Mustangs closed in behind him, diving faster, the weight of their own momentum still helping them maintain range. The first Mustang opened fire, a long burst. The tracers passed beneath the jet, inches from the engine nacelle. The pilot corrected upward, adjusting for lead. He fired again. This time, the round sparked across the Me-262's port wingtip, sending fragments of metal spinning into the slipstream. Now Whitney clenched a stick, forcing the aircraft into a sweeping left arc, wide, shallow, the only kind of turn the jet could handle at speed. The Mustangs followed, spreading out like wolves encircling a wounded stag, each pilot waiting for the perfect angle. Each pilot reading now Whitney's movements with clinical precision. He felt the jet's engine strain again. The temperature gauges flickered. The RPM needle trembled. Not good. Not long before something catastrophic happened. He dove lower, dangerously close to the bomber's wake turbulence. The air bucked around him, the Me-262 shaking hard enough to rattle the canopy. Machine gun fire flashed behind him as the Mustangs tried to force him back upward, back into open sky, where they'd have the shot. Not yet. Not until he found the right opening. He rolled right. Slight. Controlled. Intentional.
He felt the jet's engine strain again. The temperature gauges flickered. The RPM needle trembled. Not good. Not long before something catastrophic happened. He dove lower, dangerously close to the bomber's wake turbulence. The air bucked around him, the Me-262 shaking hard enough to rattle the canopy. Machine gun fire flashed behind him as the Mustangs tried to force him back upward, back into open sky, where they'd have a shot. Not yet. Not until he found the right opening. He rolled right. Slight. Controlled. Intentional. He slipped beneath the wing of AB-24, using the bomber's bulk as a momentary shield. Turrets swiveled in confusion, unsure they could fire without hitting their own aircraft. For a brief, brilliant moment, the Mustangs hesitated, and that hesitation gave him an opening. He pushed the throttle forward, careful not to spike the engine. The Me-262 surged. It climbed 1,000 feet in seconds, then another 1,000. The bomber stream fell away beneath him. The flak burst grew smaller. The tracers dwindled to scattered pinpricks of red. Moonlight washed across his canopy. He had broken free. But when he leveled out, the sky ahead was not empty, because waiting for him, silhouetted against the stars, unmoving, patient, was another American fighter he hadn't seen. Not above, not behind, ahead. A Mustang, nose pointed directly at him. The perfect trap. The American pilot rolled slightly, tilting his wings in a gesture that felt almost like acknowledgement. Then he dove straight toward the jet. Head on. Full throttle. Two aircraft hurtling at each other at a combined speed of nearly 800 miles per hour. Nowotny's pupils tightened. He steadied his hand. There were only seconds, then fractions, then 0320 hours. Lechfeld Air Base lay under a thin veil of morning frost, the kind that collected on fuel drums and turned the tarmac into a pale mirror. Above it, the sky was a deep cobalt, the last stars fading as if they too were being outpaced by the new age of flight being born on that runway. The ground crew had been awake for hours already, heaving ammunition crates, checking fuel seals, tightening the bolts on engine cowlings that rattled loose every time the jets howled to life. The Jumo 004 turbines were magnificent, but they were also temperamental things. Metal hearts that heated unevenly, blades that warped if a pilot shoved the throttle forward too quickly. And that was the problem, the thing that no Allied intelligence report understood yet. The Me-262 wasn't just fast. It was fragile, and learning to master it meant entering a world where every instinct a pilot had learned in a propeller-driven aircraft suddenly turned against him. Major Walter Nowotny stood near the wing of his jet, gloves tucked under one arm, his face still marked by the sleeplessness of the last week. He had achieved 258 victories in the air, an almost mythic number whispered among pilots across Europe. But none of those had been earned in a machine like this. He ran his palm along the cold metal of the fuselage, as if greeting an unpredictable animal. The jet didn't hum like the Bf-109 or the FW-190. Instead, even while idling, it tremored with a hungry, uneven vibration. A pulse. One of the mechanics, Schreiber, approached with a clipboard. "Sir, we've got improved turbine rings from Junkers. They might handle the heat better this time." Might. Nowotny said, half smiling. "That's a generous word today. We'll take what we can get." Schreiber wasn't wrong. Every day at Lechfeld was a race against the air war spiraling above Germany. The Allies were sending waves of bombers, B-17s, B-24s, and now the unstoppable swarms of P-51 escorts. Even the Focke-Wulf and Messerschmitt prop fighters struggled to climb fast enough to meet them, but the Me-262 could, if it survived long enough to get airborne. That was the secret no one outside the base understood. The jet was invincible in the sky, but vulnerable everywhere else, especially here. During moments like this, as pilots and mechanics debated whether the engine might spit metal fragments at 9,000 revolutions per minute, Nowotny signed the maintenance sheet. Fuel her. I want her ready by sunrise. He walked toward the command hut, boots crunching frost, mind drifting to the last briefing he'd attended in Berlin. The officers in starched uniforms. The map studded with color pins. The urgent demands for results. Berlin wanted miracles. But out here, miracles required a runway and 2 engines that didn't explode. Inside the command hut, Oberleutnant Grimm, the duty officer, was sorting through the previous night's dispatches. "Morning, sir," Grimm said without looking up. "Weather should hold for another hour." "That's all I need." Grimm finally raised his head. "Fuel shortages are getting worse. And the Americans, sir, they're adapting." Nowotny stepped closer. "How so?" "They're sending fighter sweeps before the bombers. P-51s hunting for jets on takeoff." Nowotny's jaw tightened. That was the nightmare scenario. The Me-262 was a beast at 30,000 feet, but on the runway, it was a sitting target. Worse, if the pilot throttled up the engines too fast, he could destroy his own turbines before clearing the airstrip. This was the knife edge they lived on. Too slow, and the enemy cut them down. Too fast, and the aircraft tore itself apart. "Tell command we need more flak guns around the runway," Nowotny said. Grimm nodded. "Already requested." But they both knew how that would go. Germany was running out of metal, out of men, out of time. By 0500 hours, the horizon glowed orange. Mist clung low to the ground, swirling under the wings of the parked jets. Mechanics connected fuel lines, checked the 30 million Malawian Quach's 108 cannons, and ran final tests on hydraulic systems. Nowotny approaches aircraft, the one he trusted most. White 8. Its canopy reflected the rising sun, like a curved shard of polished steel. He climbed the ladder, eased into the cockpit, and pulled the harness across his chest. Every pilot who flew the Me-262 said the same thing the first time they sealed the canopy. It felt like climbing into a weapon, not a machine. Ground crew pulled chocks. A signal officer raised 2 paddles. Nowotny lowered his oxygen mask. Throttle gently forward. The turbines coughed. Then they screamed. 2 thin spirals of fire curled from the exhaust cones as the engine stabilized. The entire aircraft vibrated. The control stick trembled faintly in his hand. The air around the cockpit shimmered with heat. He took a breath, then pushed the throttle. The jet lurched forward. Acceleration, the Me-262 wasn't a surge. It was a shove, a raw force pressing the pilot into the seat, flattening his lungs, stretching the world outside into a blur of frost and grass. The runway streaked beneath him, 120 kilometers per hour, 200 kilometers per hour, 260, a flash. Something glinted above the tree-line. Then 2 more. Then the unmistakable silhouette of 4-bladed propeller slicing through the dawn. P-51s. High, diving fast. They'd come early. The alarm klaxon wailed across the base as Nowotny jammed the throttle forward. The turbines whined dangerously, too hot, too soon. But there was no time to care. The Mustangs were dropping into attack formation. "White 8, accelerate," the tower shouted. "You must get airborne." Nowotny kept pushing. 270 kilometers per hour, 290, 310. The P-51s opened fire. Tracers slashed across the runway, kicking up dust. One jet at the far end of the strip erupted into flame before it ever moved. "Faster!" Nowotny muttered. "Come on, faster." He hit rotation speed. Pulled back. The Me-262 lifted, smooth, effortless, as if gravity had simply let go. The airframe steadied. The vibrations eased. He was airborne. And in that moment, the entire fight flipped. Nowotny shoved the throttle to full combat power. The turbines roared like twin thunderclaps. Speed built instantly, blurring the edges of the sky, stretching the horizon, making the P-51s look as though they were standing still. He climbed. 350 miles per hour, 400, 460. The Mustangs tried to follow, but their angle was wrong. Their engines screamed in protest. They could turn tighter, but they couldn't chase this kind of vertical acceleration. Now he looped over the top, bleeding altitude, rolling into the sun. And then he dove straight toward the bomber stream, materializing far in the distance. Rows of B, 24 Liberators. Columns, hundreds. The morning light glinted off their aluminum skins like a constellation drifting east. White ate to base. Now, he said, voice calm now. I've broken through the fighters. I'm engaged in the bombers. His thumb flicked the weapon safety. The 108 Malawian Quach's cannons, armed with a deep metallic clunk. He was entering the one place on Earth where everything made sense, where speed was life, where instinct sharpened into something like prophecy. His jet leveled. The bombers grew larger. And the future of air combat, of warfare itself, hurtled toward him at 540 miles per hour. What he saw next would not only alter the mission, it would alter the fate of Germany's jet program. The horizon trembled with the distant rumble of bomber engines. B. 24 Liberators glinted like lines of silver as the first rays of dawn reflected off their fuselages. From 12,000 feet, the formation resembled a moving city, a rigid lattice of steel wings, gun turrets flicking, propellers slicing the morning haze. Each bomber was a fortress, each turret a sentinel, each gunner a man who had survived the firestorms of Europe and expected nothing less than hell from the skies above. Now he adjusted his throttle, the Jumo 004S whining like caged beasts under the strain. He knew what he was up against. The bombers weren't alone. Their escorts were already arriving, a shadow of Mustangs weaving into position like predators circling unseen prey. But he didn't hesitate. Speed was his ally. At 500 miles per hour, the Me-262 shape was almost imperceptible. Only glints of sunlight on the wingtip or the brief muzzle flash of a cannon could betray its presence. He dove, aligning his trajectory with the trailing Liberators. Inside the first bomber, Tail Gunner Staff Sergeant Malloy froze as a streak of silver tore across the sky. His eyes widened in disbelief. He's too fast, he's impossible. Malloy stammered. He squeezed the trigger. Twin .50 caliber spat fire into the open air, tracers tearing toward the jet in arcs of desperate brilliance. The rounds were close. Too close. But the Me-262 had already slipped past them, its engine screaming, the fuselage trembling in response to the raw velocity. Now he aimed at the first target, calculating the lead instinctively. For 108 Malawian Quach's rounds detonated, each one tearing through aluminum and hydraulic lines. Flames erupted from the bomber's starboard wing. The aircraft listed, smoke curling upward in a grotesque sculpture of fire. Crewmen shouted, scrambled for parachutes, and yet the formation didn't break. They tightened ranks instinctively, a moving fortress that had survived countless attacks. But now they were facing a new reality, a machine that could outpace, outgun, and outthink every doctrine of the past. The second bomber swung its tail turret around to intercept, but the Me-262's speed rendered its aim useless. Tracers whipped past, missing by meters, leaving only the faint smell of hot metal in the cockpit. Now he rolled sharply, using the sun as concealment. His instruments vibrated violently, the engines teetering on their thermal limit. Every decision was a knife edge, too little throttle, and the bomber could escape. Too much, and the turbines would flare out, possibly destroying the aircraft. He dove again, targeting another Liberator. For more 108 Malawian Quach's rounds, and the bomber erupted in a sheet of fire that reflected in the glassy eyes of its crew. Behind him, the Mustangs closed in disciplined and relentless. Nautney had anticipated them. He wasn't just a pilot. He was the first in a new class of air warrior, and his weapon was not only steel, but the very concept of speed. He threaded the Me-262 through the formation, exploiting the blind spots, using turbulence and shadows as armor. Each bomber hit, each turret evaded, each Mustang frustrated, was a lesson in physics and psychology. He was learning the limits of his machine, the strengths of his enemies, and the fragile line between genius and disaster. But even as he danced through the sky, a new threat emerged. One Mustang, aggressive and calculating, closed the distance. Its nose gleamed, catching a reflection of the rising sun, engines screaming in a symphony of desperation. Now Whitney leveled out just enough to draw a bead on another bomber, then pulled into a shallow climb, letting the Mustang close. The American pilot was skilled. He understood angles, timing, lead, but he could not match raw acceleration. For a brief, suspended moment, two eras collided. Piston and jet, instinct and innovation, human skill and technological leap. The Mustang fired, and Me-262 shuddered as tracers clipped the fuselage. Sparks flew, but the jet held, its titanium-reinforced wings shrugging off the assault. Then Whitney pushed forward, the turbine screaming in protest, and disappeared into a streak of silver. The Mustang's shots passed harmlessly behind him, leaving nothing but a faint heat shimmer in the morning sky. Below, the bomber formation was chaos. Smoke and flame rose from multiple aircraft, engines failing, wings sheared by 108 Malawian Quach's firepower. Crewmen bailed out, some too low to survive the fall, others drifting in the sky like fragile dolls against a cathedral of destruction. Whitney's mind remained cold, calculating. He had learned that the Me-262 wasn't just a fighter, it was a force multiplier. Its speed turned defensive formations into vulnerable targets. Its cannons converted hesitation into annihilation. And above all, it taught him that the future combat was no longer reactionary. It was anticipatory, preemptive, unstoppable. As he leveled again, he spotted the lead bomber, its formation breaking slightly, disrupted by the carnage behind it. His instruments flickered. The Jumo turbines were vibrating near redline. But he could not stop. Momentum demanded continuation, and the history of the Me-262 demanded demonstration. The dive, the sighting, the aim. He squeezed the triggers again, for more detonations. Flames engulfed the fuselage. Another Liberator was lost to the annals of war. Behind him, the P-51s hesitated, not for lack of courage, but because the Me-262 had rewritten the rules. The Americans had never faced such speed, such unpredictability, such raw kinetic supremacy. Whitney banked away, engine straining, breath steady. He scanned the horizon. The remaining bombers were scattered, some damaged, some lost, their escorts forced to reconsider interception angles, their momentum constrained by the physics of air combat that now favored the jet. And yet, even in triumph, he knew the danger was not gone. For every bomber destroyed, every Mustang frustrated, a new wave would come. The Allies would adapt. They always did. But for now, in the pale light of dawn over southern Germany, the impossible had arrived. He cut throttle slightly, letting the Me-262 glide. The morning wind whistled across the canopy, the smell of burning fuel and distant tracer rounds filling the cockpit. Below, the ruined bomber formation glimmered in the sunlight, smoke and flame painting a vivid tableau of destruction. Whitney exhaled slowly. The war was still raging. The skies were still crowded. But one thing had changed irrevocably. The future had arrived, screaming at 540 miles per hour, and it had a name, Messerschmitt Me-262. A new era of air combat had begun. The first reports reached Allied intelligence shortly after dawn. Radar operators blinked at screens that tracked aircraft moving far faster than anything they had cataloged. Early reports dismissed them, mechanical errors, malfunctions, exaggerations. But by midday, the truth became undeniable. Pilots who had survived encounters described a silver streak, a blur, a phantom fighter that seemed to bend the very laws of pursuit. Impossible, muttered Colonel James Harding of the 8th Air Force. His brow was furrowed over mission reports that listed losses far exceeding anything anticipated. Bombers returning from raids on southern Germany spoke of jet fighters appearing from nowhere, disappearing like ghosts. And then came the evidence. Photographs from reconnaissance planes, torn sections of B-24 wings with cannon slashes far wider than .50 caliber bullets could make, scorched rivets, scorched fuselages, and eyewitness accounts that could not be ignored. The Allies had been confident. They had believed air power tactics, and sheer numbers would dominate the skies of Europe for months to come. And now, within a single morning, that confidence faltered. Major Walter Nowotny, meanwhile, was refueling at Lechfeld, engine still warm, canopy open, mechanics nervously glancing at the Jumo turbines as they cooled. He knew the world had shifted. The Me-262 was no longer an experimental curiosity. It was a weapon of instantaneous impact, capable of striking terror into formations that once seemed untouchable. And yet, it was also fragile. He could feel it in his bones. Turbine reliability remained low, maintenance requirements were insane, and a single miscalculation could destroy the aircraft. Unlike the rugged BF-109s and FW-190s, this jet demanded precision, both from machine and man. Nowotny's thoughts drifted to the pilots who had yet to fly her, young men with courage but lacking experience. He wondered how many would survive the first encounter with Allied bomber streams and escort fighters. But in that moment, his own survival was secondary. What mattered was what he could teach the Luftwaffe, what lessons he could force the commanders to accept. Speed was dominance. Firepower, concentrated and deliberate, was absolute. And above all, doctrine had to evolve faster than the machines themselves. Back in England, Air Force headquarters convened a secret session. Maps of southern Germany were spread across oak tables, flight logs piled in organized stacks. Wing commanders, intelligence officers, and strategy analysts argued, shouted, and scribbled calculations feverishly. "What kind of aircraft can accelerate past our fighters mid-climb?" demanded one, slamming his fist on the table. "It's impossible. There's no way it should exist." But the evidence was undeniable. Witness statements described climbs and dives impossible for conventional aircraft. They spoke of 108 Malawian Quach's cannons that tore through heavy bombers like paper. They spoke of pilots who could maneuver through formations with uncanny timing. The Me-262 was a game changer. "Then we adapt," said General Carl Spaatz, calm but grim, "or we lose more bombers than we ever imagined." Immediate research on countermeasures, tactics, and fighter deployment. No gaps, no delays. Within hours, bomber formations were altered. Escort fighters were rerouted to preemptively intercept jets before they reached the bomber streams. High-altitude bombing routes were reconsidered. The Allies understood that the rules had shifted. But no adaptation could instantly erase the reality that the Luftwaffe now had a weapon that transcended expectation. Nowotny returned to the sky that afternoon. This time, he led a small squadron of Me-262s, 3 jets flying in tight formation, their engines screaming, their speed unmatched. Below, a new bomber formation approached, escorted by Mustangs anticipating the earlier threats. The squadron's movements were synchronized, almost choreographed. Each pilot understood his role. First, break through the escorts. Second, dismantle the bomber formation. Third, return before the turbines overheated. Precision was survival. Precision was victory. As they closed the distance, Nowotny's mind became a calculation of angles, speeds, and distances. He observed the Americans' reactions, noting hesitation, overcorrections, and predictable firing patterns. Every observation, every detail, would be cataloged for the next sortie. And then the first engagement occurred. Tracer rounds arced past. The Mustangs' formation tightened, their pilots aggressive but still human. The Me-262s responded with superior acceleration, pulling hard dives and climbs that left the American pilots struggling to track them. A Liberator caught in the open received a fuselage-shredding burst from 108 Malawian Quach's cannons. Another was set aflame from the wing root to the tail. The jet pilots executed hit-and-run attacks with surgical precision, disappearing before the escorts could respond effectively. And when they reappeared, the pattern repeated, a devastating combination of speed, firepower, and ruthless efficiency. By sunset, the tally was staggering. The Me-262s had not only destroyed multiple bombers, but had also demonstrated the first practical use of jet fighters in combat. The Allies were forced to acknowledge a new reality. The war in the air would never be the same. Major Nowotny landed, his hands shaking slightly, adrenaline still coursing through him. Mechanics rushed forward, inspecting the jets, checking engines, and refueling for the next sortie. He removed his helmet, sweat and soot on his brow, and allowed himself a brief glance at the horizon, where smoke still rose from the bomber's wreckage. The war was far from over. Germany's strategic position was precarious, and fuel shortages, Allied bombing, and logistical chaos remained critical vulnerabilities. But for a fleeting critical moment, the Me-262 had proven one thing beyond all doubt. The future had arrived, and could fly faster than anyone believed possible. Allied analysts, generals, and pilots would spend weeks trying to understand what they had just seen. Reports would call it impossible. They would question the validity of eyewitness accounts. But photographs, bullet-riddled wreckage, and the accounts of survivors would confirm it. The jet had changed the battlefield forever. And for Major Walter Nowotny, sitting in the cooling cockpit of his Me-262, one thought dominated. Speed alone could create opportunity. Skill alone could create survival. And in a war defined by steel, fire, and human will, the combination was unstoppable. The sky had shifted, and he was at its apex. The next morning, 0445 hours. Lechfeld was quiet except for the hum of pre-flight engines and the occasional call of distant crows perched on frost-lined hangars. The Me-262 sat in formation on the runway, sleek shadows of silver poised against the pale light of dawn. Each aircraft seemed alive, its metal skin reflecting the sky, as if aware of the monumental role it was about to play. Major Walter Nowotny ran his hand along the fuselage of White 8, feeling the cool tension of the aircraft like a pulse under his fingertips. Behind him, his squadron was checking turbines, fuel lines, and cannons. Every movement was precise, rehearsed, the result of hours of learning, and the unspoken knowledge that mistakes at this speed could be fatal. Today's mission was different. Reconnaissance had spotted a large formation of B-17s crossing the southern Rhineland, escorted by P-51s and P-38 Lightnings. The orders were clear: engage, disrupt, and return. But there was a catch. This was the first mass deployment of multiple Me-262s against a concentrated target. No one knew how the machine would behave under prolonged combat conditions, how the pilots would adapt, or how the Allies would react when confronted with speed they couldn't match. As Nowotny climbed into the cockpit, the engines vibrated beneath him. The turbines had been tempered, but not tamed. They screamed at idle, a reminder of their raw, destructive power. He secured his harness, checked instruments, and pulled down his oxygen mask. This was no longer about survival alone. This was about proving the Me-262 could define the future of aerial warfare. At 0500 hours, the squadron taxied onto the runway. The frost crunched beneath the wheels as the jets lined up. Signals flashed, chocks were removed, and one by one the Me-262 surged forward. The Jumo 004 turbine screamed, flames licking the exhaust cones. The acceleration pressed pilots into their seats, their hearts synchronized with the trembling fuselage beneath them. White 8 lifted first, climbing at an angle that would have seemed reckless in any other aircraft. The others followed, forming a compact formation. In the early light, the jets became streaks of silver lightning tearing across the morning sky. Below, the Rhine Valley lay peaceful and unknowing, dotted with small villages and the faint glimmer of Allied bombers approaching their targets. The Me-262s approached from high altitude, the sun behind them, the air sharp and thin. Their speed rendered them almost invisible, a ghostly prelude to destruction. Nowotny scanned the horizon. He could see the B-17s forming tight defensive boxes, their gunners alert and disciplined. P-51s and P-38s patrolled the flanks, eyes scanning for threats. But the speed of the Me-262 was their greatest advantage. The pilots knew the Allies' defensive tactics, but few could calculate a jet's trajectory in real time. Few could aim at a target that could appear and vanish in seconds. The first attack was surgical. Nowotny dove from 15,000 feet, engines screaming, and aligned White 8 with the tail of a B-17. Tracer fire licked past the fuselage as he adjusted for velocity, lead, and distance simultaneously. The 108 Malawian Quach's cannons fired in devastating short bursts. The bomber's tail erupted in flame. Crewmen scrambled to the escape hatch, parachutes deploying as the aircraft wavered before spinning into smoke and destruction. The Me-262s peeled off, climbing sharply into the sunlight to evade intercepting fighters. The Americans adjusted, try and predict a new angle of attack, but each jet was faster, more responsive, and more deadly than any machine they had ever faced. For Nautni, every maneuver was instinct, calculation, and thrill. The jet wasn't just an aircraft. It was an extension of his body, his mind, and the weaponry he commanded. The lines between human and machine blurred as he executed a perfect vertical climb. Then a shallow dive, striking another bomber from below. 108 Malawian Quaches, rounds tore through fuselage and wing, and another bomber was lost in a sheet of fire. Behind him, the squadron followed, a storm of silver slicing through the bomber formation. Every sortie reinforced lessons learned the day before. Timing was everything. Speed was survival, and hesitation was fatal. But the mission was not without peril. A flight of P-51s, more cautious this time, attempted to anticipate the jet's moves. One pilot, Lieutenant Harris, pushed his Mustang to its absolute limits, climbing into White 8's dive path. Nautni banked sharply, narrowly avoiding collision. The airframe shuddered under the extreme G-forces, instruments vibrating dangerously. "Too close," he muttered, aware that one miscalculation could end everything. Yet the tension only sharpened focus. Nautni pushed forward, engine screaming, and within seconds the P-51 was behind him, frustrated and incapable of closing the gap. The squadron exploited the same tactics repeatedly. Strike quickly, ascend, loop, and return. Bombers were destroyed, escort fighters frustrated, and the psychological effect began to take hold. Every American pilot who had witnessed the attacks knew they faced a weapon that defied expectation, that punished conventional tactics, and that could not be outpaced by standard fighters. The Me-262 was no longer experimental. It was dominant. By midday, the squadron returned to Lechfeld. Exhaust fumes mixed with the morning frost as the jets landed in succession. Mechanics rushed to check turbines, inspect fuselages, and prepare for the next sortie. Major Nautni climbed out of White 8, helmet removed, eyes burning from both fatigue and exhilaration. Reports poured in. 17 losses were confirmed. Escort fighters reported encounters with jets they could neither track nor hit effectively. Allied commands scrambled to revise bomber routes and interception strategies. For Nautni, it was a moment of triumph tempered by awareness. The war would not wait. The Me-262 was fragile, and each sortie could be the last if errors occurred. Yet the lesson was clear. The age of jet warfare had begun, and for a fleeting, electrifying moment, he and his squadron had become its heralds. The skies had changed. The rules had changed. And for the first time, the future was tangible, screaming past at 540 miles per hour, .0500 hours, southern Germany. The first light of day filtered through a thin veil of clouds, painting the frost-lined tarmac of Lechfeld Air Base in pale gold. The Me-262s were already lined up, engines humming like restrained beasts, ready for another sortie. Major Walter Nautni moved along the line, his presence a steadying force to the younger pilots who would soon experience what they had already learned, the terrifying exhilaration and unforgiving reality of jet combat. Today, the mission was not only tactical, it was symbolic. Reconnaissance had spotted multiple bomber formations heading deep into the Reich. The Luftwaffe command, desperate to show effectiveness, had entrusted Nautni with a critical assignment: intercept, destroy, and return. Success would not just be measured in enemy losses, but in morale, in proving that Germany still had tools capable of turning the tide, or at least buying time. Nautni climbed into White 8, the canopy sealed with a hiss, the turbines vibrating beneath him, alive, almost sentient. The runway beneath shimmered with frost as he eased forward, the aircraft pressing him into the seat with every surge of acceleration. Behind him, his squadron mirrored his movement, each pilot aware of the stakes, each machine a razor edge between victory and death. Within minutes, the squadron had reached altitude. The bomber formations appeared like silver cities below, escorted by a phalanx of P-51s. Nautni's heart was steady. His mind was a machine of calculation. Every maneuver, every turn, every burst of cannon fire was dictated by the combination of instinct and data, honed through countless sorties. The first attack commenced. The Me-262 struck from above, exploiting the sun, shadows, and sheer speed. The 108 Malawian Quach's cannons roared, and within moments, bombers erupted in flames, fuselages twisted and torn. Parachutes bloomed in the sky as crewmen abandoned doomed aircraft. American escorts attempted to react. They climbed, dove, and swerved, but the Me-262s were already gone, streaking into sunlight, disappearing before accurate aim could be established. Every engagement was a ballet of destruction, precision, speed, and firepower in perfect, terrifying harmony. Now Whitney noticed patterns emerging. The Americans adapted quickly, predicting certain maneuvers, but the jet's acceleration and climb rates exceeded any conventional tactic. For every evasive action, the Me-262 had an answer, exploiting physics and technology in a way that propeller-driven fighters could not hope to counter. By noon, the sortie was complete. The Me-262s returned to base, engines hot, fuselages streaked with grime and residue from cannon fire. Mechanics rushed to inspect every joint, every turbine, every bolt. Now he removed his helmet, sweat and soot on his face, and allowed himself a fleeting moment of reflection. The Allied losses were confirmed. Multiple bombers destroyed, others heavily damaged. Fighter escorts had failed to intercept effectively, and intelligence reports confirmed what the pilots already knew. The Me-262 was rewriting the rules of air combat. In Berlin, reports caused shockwaves. Analysts who had dismissed jet propulsion as years away were now forced to recalibrate. A machine they had considered impossible was not only flying, it was dominating the skies. The Allies would need new tactics, new aircraft, and perhaps a new understanding of what war in the air could become. For Nautny, the mission was more than strategy or doctrine. It was proof. The Me-262 had validated itself as the first truly modern fighter, faster than any propeller plane, deadly at range, and capable of changing the very calculus of air warfare. Yet he knew the machine was only the beginning. Pilots, doctrine, logistics, and manufacturing would determine whether Germany could truly leverage this advantage, or if it would remain a fleeting marvel. He watched the horizon, seeing clouds stretch into the distance, imagining future sorties, future battles, future pilots who would experience the same thrill and terror. The war raged below, but above, the sky belonged to innovation, to speed, to Me-262. The age of jets had arrived. The impossible had become reality. And for the first time, the future of air combat was no longer a question. It was airborne, screaming past at 540 miles per hour. Major Walter Nautny climbed from the cockpit. Standing beside White Ada's mechanics busied themselves, the morning sun casting long shadows. He understood, as all pilots of the new era would, that speed, precision, and courage had become inseparable. The world had changed in ways that could not be reversed. And in that change lay both triumph and danger, promise and peril. For every moment of dominance in the sky, there was a fragile whisper of destruction beneath. The turbines were unforgiving, the fuel scarce, the Allies relentless. Yet as he surveyed the horizon, he smiled faintly. For now, the impossible was flying, and he was at its apex.